I don't know who that was, but thanks for whoever started that clap. That was really nice of you. So yeah, I'm a Houdini artist. My name is Richard Lord. These are some examples of my work. You know, you can go to my website to see more. This is just a bunch of stuff I quickly grabbed. You know, all my stuff is pretty much 100% Houdini. And if you want to find any of my socials or my email or anything like that, just go to richlord.com and you can contact me. Previously, I worked for Free Radical Design on the Time Splitters computer games, but the bulk of my career was spent at Valve Software, making the Half-Life and Paul franchise. You kind of do a bit of everything at Valve, but those were the main products that I worked on. Today I'm going to go over one of my Houdini animations and just kind of talk about how it was set up step by step. But before I start, I just want to say a really heartfelt thank you to all the side effects people for making such a cool piece of software, but particularly I want to single out Fiona for, you know, she's been asking me to do a talk for, I just checked and it's been 3 years. So I really appreciate your persistence, Fiona. Okay, try this clicker. Yeah, no, thank you for asking. Okay, so here's the animation I'm going to talk about. It was made in 2019, so it's a little bit rough around the edges compared to my newer stuff, I think. But I picked it because it's kind of easy to explain. And I didn't know Houdini very well when I made this animation, so I kind of learnt it as I went. The name of the musician is on the screen there, so if you pop over to his Bandcamp, I'm sure he'd appreciate it. It's about 2.5 minutes long, so yes, maybe it's a little long, but let me start it. Okay, thanks very much. So I had a really kind of a stupid, simple little mantra when I made this project. One of the things I really like to do is keep myself in the dark as to what things are going to look like. I'm not particularly interested in doing concepts or anything like that. I like things to be completely surprising, and I really don't know what's going to come out. So I had this little mantra that I used for this particular project, which was just to do a really simple little experiment and then look at the results, then do another really tiny experiment inspired by the previous one and just keep repeating it over and over again. It's a pretty simple thing. I think a lot of people stumble into this kind of thing. But it meant I didn't have to have this like big concept before I started. I could just kind of look just slightly in front of my nose and just slowly like make my way towards a finished thing. And it would keep me kind of interested, and all the surprises would kind of delight me as I went along. And I find Houdini is super useful for this kind of work because it's procedural and no base. You can do an experiment and you can just like insert it right at the top of the tree and have that filter all the way through. You don't just have to do it on the baked geometry kind of at the end of your chain. So it's really flexible like that. It's also a super vast program, and if you just pick off these little slices, it's kind of really great for, you know, learning it. It means you don't have to, again, bite off a big chunk. You can just like learn a tiny little thing each day, and slowly that just builds up into this sort of vast store of knowledge. It's also got really great methods for storing ideas. So, you know, you make like a little experiment, but you don't have somewhere for it to go right now. You can just kind of like take that and add a sticky note and some code comments and, you know, even an image or a GIF, and just kind of organize things so that you can recall what you did really easily afterwards. So I tend to use Houdini like a notepad. I'll just like do these little experiments, and I just fill like HIP files with little things that I do, just like really kind of giant HIP files. And recently I kind of thought it would be fun to give those away to the community. So this is one of them. I think this one's on maths, and I've got one on rigid bodies too. But they really kind of help me remember what I've done, and they're really fun starting points for projects. So kind of in that spirit, I've also made a HIP file to give away for this talk, and every slide I'm going to show you is in the HIP file. I've uploaded it. I've got a really like super small, modest Patreon, and it's already on there. And as soon as I can, I'm going to upload it for free as well. So if you want that, hopefully it'll be available in a few days. But you know, I'm going to go through this quite fast. So if you want to see exactly the code or exactly the nodes that I used, download that and do with it whatever you like. Okay, so I'm going to start going through it. So the first thing I worked on was the rigid body animation for this. And the very first time I opened Houdini, I dropped down a sphere and was really surprised and delighted to find that they have this concept of like a primitive sphere, which is just this single like positional positional vector that you can use to position it however you want. And I really like that concept because I kind of came from a world where spheres were made of like thousands of polys, but this seemed like really lightweight. So I had this kind of idea. The only thought I had when I started this project was, let's make a project using nothing but this sphere. Let's just use it tons of times and see what I can do, which is kind of a cliche, I guess, in, you know, motion graphics or something. But, you know, I thought it would be a fun thing to do. So I turned on the rigid body solver and started throwing it to the floor, which is really simple. Bullet has the idea of a primitive sphere shape, so it was super, super fast. And yeah, I just kind of learned how to do this. Based on that, I started throwing tons of spheres to the floor, and you know, I was using the SOP solver for this, which is this brilliant concept where you can take dot geometry and just kind of load it into the SOPs context, mess with it however you like, and then just throw it back out to dots. And you know, that was super fun. But I didn't get super excited until I discovered how Houdini does constraints. And constraint geometry in Houdini is like super, really excellent. Like, I can't say enough good stuff about it. It's actual geometry. So here, the yellow line connecting these two spheres is just a poly line. And each point on the end of that line just has an attribute which connects it to the sphere, which is great because, you know, Houdini's got all these procedural methods for creating geometry. So here's a really bad example of that. So I'm just dropping them to the floor, constrained together. But if I move those spheres apart, the system knows to like make a bigger constraint, and it just kind of all works without me having to change the node network at all. So, you know, that kind of brings you on to thinking, well, I can make chains of objects, and I can make little systems where, you know, if I just change the number of spheres, the number of constraints just updates in exactly the same system. And here's another couple of examples of some really simple kind of stupid systems where instead of using hard constraints, I'm using spring constraints instead. Yeah, so lots of flexibility, really simple to do, and it's all really procedural. And and there was one little other thing that I did, which I really enjoyed. There was a little field called motor constraint, which I didn't know what it was. So I tried feeding it like different types of animation data. So in this case, just a sine wave, and it just all worked. And, you know, once again, if you can do something once, you should always do it like tons of times. So this is pretty much exactly the same tree. I haven't really changed anything apart from I've just changed the number to say, give me more, and offset the animation a little bit. And it all just works and updates Yeah, perfectly. Kind of based on those experiments, I did these are just like kind of things I did to solidify the knowledge that I'd come up with. Again, these are all available in some of my free files. These were rendered in Redshift originally, but I remade them in Karma and gave them away recently. So if you want to know how all that works, just grab the file and check it out. Like doing little exercises like this is just really useful for, you know, retaining knowledge in your brain. But there was one little experiment that I did, which was the basis of the animation that I showed, and that was really simple. It was just like, let's spawn in a sphere slightly offset to the previous sphere, and let's add a constraint between those two things, and let's just wiggle all the motors I can find and see what happens. And I'd get this kind of wiggly line, which, you know, kind of looks like this when it's flat shaded. And yeah, I don't know. It's obviously kind of very simple, but I thought it was kind of really beautiful. Like the way the spheres are like mashed together, create their own textures and different styling conditions, you know, look different. So I tried to attach it to a bigger sphere, which gave me this kind of movement. The sort of motor constraints would pull around the bigger sphere, and it made this kind of weird, like tadpole thing, which, you know, I don't know. Weirdly, I was excited by this, and so then I wanted to dress it up a little bit and make it look a bit more interesting. So I started working on this kind of idea of these sort of puffballs, again, without any idea of what they were going to look like in the end. I was looking at some cellular imagery, like this kind of, you know, medical kind of stuff. And I really just like the way it's just lots of the same thing, just packed together inside essentially the same thing. So circles and circles and circles. And so I scattered some circles on my animation and it looked rubbish. So I was kind of a bit disappointed. So I thought I had to think a little bit deeper about it. And I was kind of thinking of the shape of the rigid body that I had. I had like a big sphere which was rolling around the floor, and it sort of occurred to me that if I scattered points on the surface of that sphere and then copied spheres to those points, they would extend beyond the bounds of the physics hole, you know, clip through the ground and kind of not look very good. So I wrote a little line of Vex just to push all those spheres inside the main sphere, which kind of gave me the idea that maybe they all don't have to go in that far. Perhaps I could like just only push the big ones in, but keep the small ones kind of on the edge. So I kind of created this like bias where, you know, different spheres were pushed inside the main sphere at different rates. And you know, this didn't seem particularly interesting, but when I added loads of them, I started getting some kind of texture on the edge, which was sort of interesting. Like as you're adjusting the bias, you're changing it from like a kind of wrinkly texture to this kind of, excuse me, this kind of alligator texture. So then this is it in 3D. And, you know, everyone I think has made a Houdini ball of blobs, and this was my ball of blobs. And yeah, just adjusting the bias, you could turn it all the way back into a sphere, and then back into a blobby shape. And the initial distribution of the spheres here is, you know, it's just created by the attribute noise node. Sorry, so you're getting some initial interesting distribution straight out of the gate. But it really started to come together when I kind of came up with this idea, which was to distribute the initial size of the spheres based on these kind of few surface points that I came up with. And as soon as I did that, and as soon as I started adjusting the bias on that, I'd get this kind of weird pumping motion that had this like really strange puckering around the edge, which often, actually, I'm not going to say that, sorry. It reminds people of something. And I really responded to that. Like I really didn't expect to get this thing. And, you know, I thought it was pretty kind of beautiful, to be honest. So I made this this sheet of shapes based on it. And what's really amazing about working like this is you just take a little system, make a bunch of iterations on it, and you'll find that 90% of them, as you can see, are just completely awful and not interesting at all. But then you'll find this kind of 10%, which is like really, really interesting. I mean, one of these looks like a pickleball, which is obviously not good. But then there's other ones in the bottom right, like there, which look like they've got these kind of cracks running over them, which I did respond to a lot. So this is like a more sort of developed sheet of that same idea where I turned that system into a HDA. And I was like, you know, just playing with different settings with exactly the same thing. And I was getting this. So it started to occur to me I should probably render these out. So I grabbed a few attributes from it. So here, the black and white represents the size of the spheres. Here, the black and white represents how far away they are from the rest position. And here, this is the distance from those original surface points, which set their initial size. And altogether, it looked like this kind of sort of diseased orange, I guess. Not particularly inspiring, but when you threw thousands and thousands of points in there, you got this really, really weird motion, which, it's not realistic, but there's something organic about it, but it sort of looks alien. And I just really like the way that when it kind of like pulsed, these other textures would show up. You see kind of the structure of the circles under there. So, I was kind of loving it at this point, to be honest. I was pretty excited. So I tried to strap it onto the animation that I made earlier just by replacing the main sphere, grabbed its orient and just replaced it with Puffball and ended up with this. But yeah, I didn't really know what to do with it. And I remembered something that one of my old animator friends had said to me, which was that humans lead with their heads, but zombies lead with their feet, which is probably a really simple concept if you're an animator and you think about characters in that way. But to me, it was kind of really amazing to think of, parasitic motion as kind of like a puppet. So I made this little shape, which was kind of like a starfish. The legs of this thing are just chains of spheres again. And I thought I could just pull it along the ground using constraints attached to the end of the tentacles. And that's what this is. So then I've tried pulling it, with a sort of staccato rhythm, and already you can kind of see the rigid bodies are taking over a little bit and making this weird little shuffling kind of motion. And when you split that animation up even further and you just kind of you offset that animation per leg, it looks a bit more like this. And you raise each leg as it goes, and you get something which is not particularly convincing, but it's just some blobs, so it kind of works for blobs. Kind of the two ramps there, you've got one which is translating it in Z and the other which is translating it in Y, and you can see how sort of simple and rubbishy they are. But finally, when you kind of like fire them all off, here they're all fired in like a clockwise kind of motion. I kind of got this sort of surprising effect where they would step over each other and they would all like kind of twist and curl together. And that was something that, I super responded to that. I was like, that is amazing. I'm getting I'm doing nothing and I'm getting like quite a lot out of it. So here's another little example of a character where it was just like a bunch of procedural curves drawn around a sphere. I constrained it together. So you've got the red constraints connecting it to the body. The yellow constraints are connecting all those strings together in a knot. And then the blue constraints are just attached to the legs again. And this is the incredible animation on those constraints. This was a 3-year of college kind of situation going on here. And this is, you put the rigid body solver on and it just pulls it along, and you replace that with this thing, and there we go. And once again, if you do something once, you've really got to, it's rude if you don't do it tons of times. You have to do a lot at the same time. So here I found if I just put them next to each other, they would twist up together. So I was getting lots of stuff out of this system that I didn't intend at all, which I liked. But I didn't really think that went far enough. So I remembered this growth solver, which was another one of the early things I did in Houdini. And I always really liked these shapes. And I wondered if I could just grab those and maybe use those as the legs of a creature in some way. And I was also rendering them in kind of a similar way. They were just like spheres mashed together because I couldn't quite work out how to make these polywire nicely. So I was just copying spheres along the length of them. So they kind of had this thematic connection anyway. And this is what it came out looking like. And it really is done exactly the same way as the other things here. The big sphere in the middle, any growth that is inside that just gets constrained to the body. Then there's just like a chain of constraints that run down all of the spheres that make up the growth. And then you just search for tips, and tips are just any piece of growth which only has one neighbor, essentially. And then you just, that will be a tip, or it'll be the root of the chain. So you just ignore the root. You attach that kind of amazing animation to the tips, and it just flies along, just pulls itself along there. Seems to be enjoying itself. And this is a little reel of these little experiments that I did, most of which made it in some form into the movie, and all of which I would say were accidental in some ways. This torus was my favorite because it stood up on its own. And as soon as it did that, I just mashed the cache this quick button to make sure I didn't lose it. But it did it every time. So I was really surprised by And there was just one little bit at the end, which was kind of started off as like a joke. I had this little experiment, which I thought was so stupid. I was in love with it, where it was just a line of circles with this, again, the same animation attached to the end. And it was so pathetic. I sort of fell in love with it. And I put tons of them in the same scene at once. And this is just exactly the same as that, but there's just loads of them going off at once. And they all twisted together, and they reminded me of like a kind of snake ball, you know, how like snakes kind of mate together. And I was like, this is perfect for the sort of the end. You've got this kind of evolution of a creature, sort of disintegrates and becomes this kind of weird, like excited ball at the end. Yeah, so that's where they came from. And then the rocks. So just to give you some context where these came from, at this point my renders look like this, and this is a classic kind of render that I think it finished at 4 a.m. in the morning, so I stayed up to watch it appear on my computer. Thought it was like amazing, and went to bed with this amazing excitement, couldn't sleep at all, and woke up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and ran to my computer and looked at it and realized that it was really dire and not very good at all. Like this really terrible yellow light. I don't know what's going on there. And the color schemes are awful, and the texture just has no context whatsoever. But I love it when that happens, because it kind of means you have to become a little bit of a detective and sort of work out what it is that's sort of wrong with things. And the best way to do that is to jump at some reference. And the reference I found was this amazing intro to one of my favorite movies from when I was 8, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 1978 version. And it's just got this incredible opening sequence set on, I don't know, like a planet or a comet or something, which is just filled with atmosphere. And I just find it really beautiful. It's my favorite bit of the film by far. And you can probably see the influence on it. I didn't really manage to do better than this, so I'm probably going to have another crack at it at some point and try and beat it one day. And I also found these kind of geology exhibits, which now I'm really approaching territory where maybe this was a little bit of a steal rather than an inspiration. And you've kind of got, this really beautiful blues and greens of this cloth, which I really enjoyed. And all these things, they just look sort of plonked in place. It's kind of weirdly alien in a way. I just really enjoyed like the plonking. It just looks really, really plonked. And then I really like these sort of these sort of beach things where the mist was kind of rolling in the morning. I was really responding to that as sort of an atmospheric thing. So I did what everyone does. I ran to Quixel Megascans, grabbed a rock, grabbed a texture. 30 seconds later, I'd got the look that I was after. But I didn't need to make my own rocks. And I know if you go to YouTube and type in Houdini rock, I think you'll get about 2 million hits. So I'm going to do this really, really quickly. The way I did it was to have a density volume, which I really like density volumes because they're just so simple to understand. Every voxel is just a value. You just add and subtract from it. Here's that density volume with 2 different scales of alligator noise. And I picked alligator noise because it was spherical looking. So it kind of, again, thematically sort of matched what I was doing with all the spheres elsewhere. Combining those 2 different scales into a network with the magical VDB combine. And then I wanted this to look like it was sort of an internal process of erosion going on the inside of the rocks. So I grabbed the edge of the polygons and kind of made another volume which was denser towards the edge to kind of make like a crust on some of the surfaces. I was super disappointed when I turned it into polygons because it looked like this kind of terrible, unrealistic cheese. But there is a magical node in Houdini called the VDB reshape, which just erodes things away super nicely, and I ended up with this kind of shape, which I was beginning to enjoy. But the only problem is it leaves these little islands all over the place of floating geometry, and the way to get rid of that is just this little trick where you measure every piece of connected geometry and only keep the largest one, and the largest one is bound to be the bit you want for a gas. That was pretty much it. These are the attributes that I used to render it out. And the movie was all rendered in Redshift, and I don't really have Redshift anymore, so I wasn't really able to go over that very much. But I just used a mask based on the crust, the distance to the edge, and then the curvature of the object as well. And I just mixed a bunch of slightly edited Quixel textures to get the final look of those things. And this is what they look like unrendered in the viewport. Not particularly interesting, but I find it kind of amazing. You can just throw a random shape at a system and you get something that looks like this come out the other side. And I just spent hours playing with these rocks and sticking weird little circle creatures in there and different ideas that they had, and things just really went on a roll at this point. And every hour I'd have like a new shot to play around with. It was just, yeah, this bit's by far the funnest part of the project, where you've built all these systems and you're just jamming them all together in weird ways. And I had this other idea, which was, maybe there could be this type of creature which hadn't hatched yet, so it was sort of stuck in its rock. And I think this came from the fact that I was playing a lot of Pikmin at the time. I don't know if anyone plays Pikmin, but you're this character and you're chased by these super adorable little creatures. I really wanted to make something adorable in this movie, so this is my version of adorableness. I thought it was really, really cute the way they ran along. I loved it. And so finally, yeah, just putting it all together. I had all these pieces, and they just needed like a final lick of paint really to get it all working. So again, jump to some reference and see what you can find. It's often a good choice at this point. And it'll come as no surprise to know that I enjoy David Lynch movies, and particularly the way they look. And Blue Velvet is a beautiful film. It's got these incredible reds and blues like that clash in this amazing way. And I had all this blue, and watching that movie, I realized that I should try and add some red as well, and kind of, sort of emulate that vibe, which is where the red of the text and the red of the tentacles came in. I also was struggling compositionally, so I was Googling my way around trying to find like interesting compositional techniques, and I came across this steelyard composition, which I think will sort of tickle anyone who's into Houdini, because it's based on like balance, so you can make like a little system for it. You have like a fulcrum, which is in the center of your composition. You've got like you have a big shape, small shapes, and obviously they need to be balanced. So your bigger shape needs to be closer to the fulcrum. Your little shape is sort of further out. And the thing that I really liked about this is it's like a kind of fake technique for making things look non-organic, because all these things just look completely alien and not natural at all. They look far too hand-placed. And I feel like that's something I really respond to, like when you find like a Romanesco, or you find like the sunflower seeds, you get this kind of like insane order that you feel like shouldn't be there because it's supposed to be organic, and it looks unnatural in a weird way and creepy. And I kind of felt that about this composition. So, I made like a little version of this to stick in the hip just because it was fun. So you can play around with that if you like. But, you can use, in this instance, I'm just using size to balance the things, but, you could use like color, or you could use, depth to the camera, or anything really. It's a really fun system to play around with, just to come up with some basic ideas. And I used it for the first shot, and for the longest time, the first shot was just a single rock, and it was weirdly uninteresting as just a single rock. But as soon as I added this other one, I felt like it kind of was working pretty well. And I mean, I guess you're going to see lots of wonderful things at SIGGRAPH, but I think my proudest moment is just a placement of these two rocks. And yeah, all there was left to do was do some color correction, which is the only thing I did outside Houdini. All the smoke was Houdini. I was no expert at it at the time, so I did kind of stumble my way through it. There are a few like 2D cards. I bought like a smoke element pack and just I draw like 3 cards. I shot like this one. It's got like a foreground, mid-ground, and a background shot smoke element. And it was just like a 2D card. I colored everything black and just very crudely used an additive filter to add it on there. So not really high-end comping, but for the majority of it, it kind of worked out not too bad. And that's it. I'm at the end. I've no idea how long I took. I do have some emergency slides if I have a bit longer. Do I have longer? I'm going to do it then. I didn't hear anything. So this is my emergency slide. And this is, based on that, I made a second movie, which was exactly the same techniques as the first one. But I think it actually came out a little bit better. So let's play that one.
I thought it was in the past, but now you don't know. Our pleasures. Our pleasures.
I got a bit carried away at this point. Thank you. This is my second emergency slide. I'm doing exactly the same thing again because I can't stop myself at this point. It's sort of too fun to play around in Houdini. And yeah, I've got a little Discord, which is basically me talking to myself, and sometimes people add emojis, which is super nice. And you can join that Discord if you like and follow along with this project. It's another rigid body kind of thing where I've taken a character, chopped it up, and made a bunch of I don't know, you can decide for yourself things out of it. But the cool thing about this is it produces a physics setup, but it also produces a kineffect skeleton. So I can animate these things and yeah, do a sort. So that this is moving along quite fast at the moment. Hopefully I can get it out by the end of the year if I get my finger out. That's everything. I don't have anything else. That's my final emergency slide. So that's exactly half an hour. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming. I appreciate everyone for coming to my talk. And once again, thanks to Side Effects. And Fiona's gone now, but I'm going to thank her once again. But yeah, thanks. I think, is there questions? I don't really know.
So cool, so cool. Is there any questions for Rich? Yeah, in the back.
I'm especially curious how you did the camera animation with all of the changing reference frames to continue getting smaller and smaller. Were the objects getting larger, and how did you keep the camera relative to everything? In a way you could control?
The objects were getting bigger and the cameras were staying the same size. And the way it worked is there's, I've actually got an example of this on one of the HIP files. I think the math HIP files got it in. So there's basically two spheres and the camera is, they're growing. So one's moving into the exact same position as one previously. And the camera is just tracking one sphere. And over the course of that interpolation, it just like focuses on the next sphere. And then there's various offsets so you can mess around with it. So, I think there's a little video I did of that on one of my Twitter maybe, or X or whatever embarrassment it is now.
Okay. So basically the creature that was the current one being focused on, that sort of interpolated between the old one and the new one as its reference frame.
Exactly, yeah. The camera was like focused on. So it was all designed as spheres at first, which seems to be a thing that I have. And yeah, it just, the creatures got added after the spheres. Yeah, I'm going to break down that movie properly at one point and upload that file too. I just not got around to that one yet. So there'll be a full file for that one originally. I'm doing an automatic typing thing as well for some reason, which has been fun. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
I just want to say on behalf of the community, thank you for sharing those files. That's super awesome that you're sharing the files, that you've notated them. Like, what a great learning opportunity for everyone. So,
thank you.
I've got a question that's also kind of related to the camera movement. So I noticed on your the first film that you showed, the camera had a lot of nice jitter to it. And I'm wondering if you did that in Houdini with like some procedural stuff, seeing as you even had like a procedural method for like composition.
You know, I didn't. That was I think I shook a camera in front of a piece of paper with some dots on it. and I just kind of stood there. My hand was a bit shaky on that day, so I just took that into Blender, I think, and camera tracked it there, or I might have used Synthesize. I can't really remember now. So that wasn't Houdini, but the bit I did do in Houdini with that is I had a system so I could loop it. So I only had about 200 frames maximum of camera shake. So I made this little system which would loop it every so often, so I could let it play. And if you actually watch the movie, you can see the jitters the same on every shot, which is a little embarrassing. I didn't notice it at the time until someone pointed it out. But there's this one little jerk that goes to the right that just keeps happening again and again and again. But luckily, no one's really noticed. But yeah, no, it was motion tracked essentially.
That's very cool. Thank you.
Maybe one more question. Yes.
All of your characters have such a big sense of personality, even when they're primitive shapes. And I was wondering, does that thread of personality tend to come out earlier, and you kind of let that shape how the character comes out, or does it tend to is it something that you notice more at the end, or it surprises you more at the end?
It's really hard to say, because I genuinely do have this method where I don't ever think about anything I do at all. I only like to think literally in front of my nose. If I think beyond that at all, I just get bored instantly and don't do anything. So I don't have any intention of doing anything. Houdini made me do all of this. I did. So I didn't intend them to be charming at all. I didn't even think of them as charming until people told me they were. I just thought of them as blobs, or I call my stuff things. That's how I describe it. I like to make things. So any personality that came through, I think, was just an accident from the solvers, honestly, and maybe playing too much pigment. So yeah, I really didn't. It wasn't intentional. I don't do intentional things. Really. I'm sorry, that's not a very good answer, but it's an honest answer, I think.
I think it makes sense. Procedural personality.
Yeah.
Next year's T-shirt, Houdini made me do it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Rich. That was awesome.
Thank you.